This is the Leadership in Insurance podcast, brought to you by FinPro Search Partners.
Insurance companies are businesses and they need to look for the long term and be sustainable.
We went from 0 to 1 and now it's going from 1 to 100.
Insurance as a concept, as a kind of service, is brilliant. The execution is what we're looking at now.
I think the companies that are going to succeed are the ones that are going to understand and master the art of intent.
When we talk about innovation, we lean too heavily to think about technology and we don't think about creating a culture of innovation.
I think innovation is essentially continuous improvement of existing processes and platforms and product.
Right? It's got to be easy. It's got to be seamless.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership in Insurance podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bond, and I'm very lucky today to be joined by Des Burke, who is Group Chief Operating Officer, Tokio Marine HCC International. Des, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Yeah, no, I'm very well, thank you. And thanks for having me on.
No, not at all, not at all. I nearly stumbled over the amount of words I had to put in your title and the company name there, so which is not the greatest start. But look, Des, obviously it's an insurance audience, most people will know, but because we've got kind of a diverse audience out there in insurtechs, investors and other sorts, not everyone knows, you and your role. So it'd be great if you could introduce yourself and obviously Tokio Marine HCC.
Yeah, happy to introduce myself. So I guess before we start, a question for you actually. So are you aware of the average life expectancy in the East End of London about the turn of the last century?
I'm not. I love the way this has started, Des. So go for it. I'm not.
So I'll give you some context why that's important. So the average life expectancy back then was 5 from birth, very low. In the East End back in those times. Why that's relevant is that's the time that my great grandfather was born, and my family and my background. When you sort of say, well, who's Des Burke? I come from a large Irish immigrant docking family from the East End, and it comes out of that background. And I think the reason that's relevant and important for me is that when you talk about who is somebody, I think understanding where they've come from, their background, will help you understand what's important to them. And certainly, I think as we go through this conversation, who you are now and where you've ended up and what your career is, they're all choices and decisions that you've made through your life. And we'll probably talk about some of those and some of those sort of points that you make those on. But they're generally influenced by who you are and those choices that you make. So I always think it's important to sort of not forget where you came from, not forget the background. And it's certainly for me as an individual framed a lot of who I am, that I've come out of that background, that sort of working class background. And when you think if the chances of my grandfather surviving and then his grandfather surviving and then my father surviving, you sort of get to your chance of being here, talking to you, and the opportunity that arises. And I don't think we should ever sort of lose sight of that. And I think if you, as a leader, understanding people and understanding their thought process, where they've come from and who they are, is just as important about knowing what job they're doing right now. So I thought I'd get that one out of the way as a bit of an intro.
I love that, Dave. And we share that background. My family are all from the East End of London, and they're all Irish immigrants from the East End of London. So yeah,
exactly. And the East End has been continuing an immigrant population that's moved through. So lots of people resonate with that. Jewish community originally, Irish community, and then subsequently Asian communities, Afro-Caribbean communities. So I think that feeling of belonging and being part of a culture and an environment does frame you as an individual. It's one of the reasons why I'm so heavily involved in our social mobility program that we've got here. It is still quite important to me about how we enable people to move through. And I might sort of touch on that a little bit when we sort of get further on. Going back to your original question, because I sort of took us off on a bit of a tangent. There is a lot in there. Tokio Marine HCC International, the organisation. I always like to describe us as a group within a group within a group. So we're the international group in Europe. We cover most of the normal European territories that you can think of. mostly based out of the UK. We've got large offices in Germany, Paris. We've got a big office in Barcelona. We are part of the HCC group. So the Houston Casualty Company, if people want to know what the HCC stands for. They were there, so that's part of that group. We jointly, between us on the HCC side, about 8 billion of GWP. We make about 3 billion of that in international. Profit-wise, which is our differentiator, international, we're highly profitable, and so we make up probably 50% of the profit of the organisation, and about just under a third of the, or just over a third of the GWP. We're all part of Tokio Marine, and people might recognise Tokio Marine. We've got a lot of group companies, over 200 different group companies across Tokio Marine. It's one of the leading insurance companies in the world, based out of Tokyo, as the name gives away, out of Japan. We're a market cap of about sort of 71, 72 billion. So large organisation, and that's why I sort of like to think of us as a group within a group within a group, because that's how it feels. We are relatively autonomous. Many people will know other parts of the organisation. So Tokio Marine Kiln, for instance, many people know in the London market and in Europe, and we're a sort of sister company from them, but really report through the US through HCC.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thank you. And yeah, I love the way you started that, and I think that's a really interesting point. And we're definitely going to have to talk about social mobility, whether it's on here or following up, because yeah, there's some initiatives that we run here. We are Tech Women, just trying to kind of promote the voices of senior leaders, senior female leaders in the space. Because unfortunately, when you talk about things like panels and investment and actually roles, there's still most people taking those roles look a little bit like us, and probably in our age brackets as well. So yeah, there's a lot to do there, but yeah, I think not forgetting where you come from, and something about that. I was talking this morning. One of my team's really stressed, and it really dawned on me is like that person, really talented, really educated, is like they could work for anyone, and they're working for me, and there's a privilege that they're working for me inside my business, and took a step back and tried to take some of that kind of stress away. So, but anyway, we digress, because I think we've got some other bits to talk about, but hopefully we'll get back to that in a bit. You've had a really interesting career, and you've got this group chief operating officer role. You've worked in different sectors. Obviously, you worked for Lloyd's. Chief Technology Officer, Prudential, CIO, CEO of the data services, worked for BP. You worked in the water industry? This is just from memory now, I'm thinking. Worked for Morgan Stanley as well. I think that kind of, what trends and challenges are thematic in the role of the COO? Because I think we like to think insurance stands alone, but I think the conversation we had, you said there's a lot of things that just pull through regardless of what industry you're in.
Yeah, I mean, when you sort of lay it all like that, it sounds quite checkered.
Yes,
but I think it comes back to what I said previously, right? Who you end up being now, the routes, the decisions that you make, all the choices that you make through life. I've worked for many different organisations in different industries, but I would say I've always worked for people I respect. And I've worked for some great leaders in that time. And I think it doesn't matter where you work or in what industry, you learn and enhance yourself by the people that you work for and the people you work with. So I would put that as a particular constant, around the industry and the industries that I've worked in. I think, again, if you take out the content, if you take out what you're doing, and you sort of say, well, is banking the same as oil and gas? Is it the same as insurance? Clearly, the product isn't, right? And in some ways, culture is very different. I'd say my career really got serious when I moved to Morgan Stanley and moved into investment banking. It was culturally a very different place to work, anywhere I'd worked previously. What I took away from that was, but it had great leadership. It was very focused. And a lot of the challenges we were dealing back then was actually, interestingly, the move to technology. It was around about, the time when we started sort of getting banking more involved with technology, automated trading, those sort of environments. Very similar to what we're looking at now with sort of what AI is doing, and sort of looking at is it taking, will it take jobs away? Will it change things? I remember sitting back looking at and talking to traders who would say technology will never replace me. I see the look in someone's eye, and I know if I've got a good deal. That's how I know. I'm not putting putting technology out that it'll never replace us. The fact is now that well over 90% of trades in the equities environment are augmented. And those people have moved on to different jobs. They're not going away. Banking hasn't shrunk. We're still sort of we're moving people into different roles. So I think as you go through industries, you see that similar transition of change, because we have, whilst I've worked in different industries, I've probably been lucky enough to work in the period of advancement for technology, particularly, from the sort of 90s through to now, that has really changed the shape of all industry. So that's a constant. Change has been the constant through it. The other thing I'd say is when you get under it, and this is again my perspective on things. People work for people, and people work with people. Right? The fact that you might be doing that in oil and gas, or you might be doing that in insurance or in water, is sort of immaterial. The set of things that people want to feel when they work, fairly compensated, job security, good work-life balance, purpose and meaning, opportunities for growth, autonomy and control, and variety and creativity, all those things. Every industry and everybody wants those. And what you're generally dealing with is problems in those not working, for one reason or the other. Whether that's through things like access to data to make people effective, through poor process where people are not feeling valued, doing repetitive work, where they haven't got autonomy because of governance that's grown. And a lot of organisations evolve; they don't sort of create. And so as they evolve, they keep a lot of their sort of past with them. And you saw that. And so, when I was in oil and gas, you could see a lot of that. That was the historic way oil and gas was run and managed. Banking, very similar. So I think there's a lot more consistency in those different industries than there is difference, really. The product is different, but I guess it's it's like somebody who sells something. You're a salesman first, and then you're selling a product. And if you're a good salesman, you can sell any product. I think if you're a good technologist, you can work in any environment. If you're somebody who's good at looking at process and understanding how to optimize, you can do that wherever you are. I've got friends that work in industries that I've never worked in, pharmaceuticals, for instance, and retail. And we talk about the same problems, the same things, slightly different nuances. So, I think there's a lot of commonality there. I touched on data. I think that's been a challenge from sort of the very first time I sort of entered the market, the employment market. My background is I come mainly through technology. Started off way back when as a mainframe operator, and our challenge then was sort of processing of data, getting data through an environment into systems to process. And now our challenge is almost the opposite of that. We've got so much data, we've got so much to deal with and process. It's sort of the other end of the spectrum, and that's been quite a shift over the years. But I think there's certainly an awful lot more in common with industries and against it, and I would encourage people to embrace that. I think you become a more rounded individual when you sort of see. It's like travel. The more places you travel, the more environments you see, the cultures you experience, the food you taste, makes you a more rounded individual. And I think that's the same for me personally. I feel much more rounded as an individual and as a leader because I've looked at different, and worked in different environments with different folks and different cultures. And that's really sort of helped me in my career.
No, I'm a big believer in that, and I think it's a funny conversation I have with my team is like the amount of kind of different businesses I've worked in, and they're all trying to turn around and go, "How old are you?" Like I had a shop in Greenwich Market. I used to work in retail. I've worked in hospitality. I've worked in advertising sales, and but weirdly, I've worked in insurance, and then I managed to do this for 20 years. But all of those things play in, like, and I would echo what you're saying. I was having a conversation between difference between advisors and mentors the other day, and so when I've got advisors for my business, they tend to be people that are quite senior recruitment people. They've built big businesses. They know how to kind of build something that's going to have scale. But the mentors I've got one that works in the hospitality sector and one that business to business loan sector. No, don't know what I do day to day at all, but the problems they talk about, the kind of a lot of the kind of operational dynamics are exactly the same. There isn't really any difference. It's just, and I really value their opinion because they also ask, quote unquote, the dumb question. You know, they go, "Why are you not doing more of that?" And usually, it's the answer. Is, to be honest, we do really well on social media. We do a lot of kind of output like this, and this does very well. And one of my friends went, "Well, why are you not doing 3 times as much of that?" Because I was trying to do some other clever little nuanced launch thing, and he said, "Well, this is the thing that works. Why are you not doing that and turbocharging it?" So, really, really interesting. All of those different approaches, all those different kind of industries, you've got those commonalities. Do you think that multi-sector experience changes how you approach problems in the business?
Yeah, I think it does. The reason for that is because you see through the product, or you see through the surface. So, as I said, when you're looking at challenges that we might have in the water industry versus in insurance, if you get behind underneath the what is it that's got the problem, and start to look at the why have we got the problem and how do we fix it, there's a real commonality there. So I think for me, I drop quite quickly into trying to understand root cause and repeatable frameworks, things that you can transfer. So there's some simple catchphrase things that you sort of pick up as you go that I absolutely believe in. What you measure drives behaviour. I think that absolutely, and we've seen that in places like the NHS. We've seen it in schools. So what you measure drives behaviour. Behaviour become habits. Habits become culture. Right? So when people talk about changing culture, it's like, well, you've got to go up that stack to work out where your problem starts. You can't just change culture. You can tell somebody just feel differently, just act differently. So I think things like that you come in and you look at something and you say, well, where is the problem? If we've got a problem with culture, where does it sit? Are we measuring the wrong things? Are we incentivizing people in the wrong way? And so those common frameworks are things that I think become anchors the further I've gone through. 5 whys, simple things like that, getting to root cause. I also have something called 5 so whats that I do with people, because quite often when people report something, they'll tell you something, and you go, well, so what? Like, what does that mean? Right. And so you get to the sort of outcome. So why does that mean something to somebody? Rather than say, we had 99% uptime. Well, so what? Like, well, it meant this. So I think you take those frameworks, and so you can sort of see through the content. So in some ways, I think that's helped me I've done lots of roles where I've done sort of transformation, and I think if you're doing that, you need to sort of understand what you're trying to transform. Simple things like giving clear direction and a place to go. A number of people sort of said, leadership's simple, right? You set direction, you employ good people, and you help them get there. And so keeping it simple, I think. So as you sort of go through, I think, looking at different industries, they'll all have their specific challenges, right? There are. Right? I mean, certainly water has a specific challenge. If I look at insurance, we can talk about the data challenges that insurance has. And banking was a transitional one. I was there during the banking crash. I was at BP during the Macondo incident. So you have things that actually do really influence your period in that industry and change how you might operate. But I'd say, for me, it's enriched that because it enables you to sort of not get too bogged down in the detail, and step back and look at that. And I look at sort of great leaders that I've worked for, because that's the other thing is, I've always, I've been so lucky in my career to work for some really good people. And I look at their careers, and I'll take so Dana DCI I worked for at BP. He was the global CIO for BP. Came from the motor industry, worked in oil and gas, went into banking, ended up as CIO for the Pentagon. multiple different, in very different environments for him to operate in. Yet you watched him and you looked at how he and how he operated. The transformation he did to technology in BP was one of the best pieces of work I've ever sort of been part of and seen. And he's done that elsewhere, and he uses that. So again, there's a great leader who has got a set of principles, way of operating, that he can move and make mobile. It's his toolbox. He takes it with him. What he goes works on is oil and gas, or he goes works on the banking industry. But I see leaders like that. I saw leaders like that early in my career. I valued them, and I see the value of them. And I think that's really important as well, that you sort of learn from people who you want to aspire to be, or aspire to try to emulate.
I was thinking as you were saying that, I was like, I had two bosses in my recruitment career that and they're two of the earlier people that I worked for, and I think about things that they said to me now. I still kind of, when I take a step back, when we're getting sort of stressed, it's like, outputs and inputs is one of them. You used to always say, and it's just essentially, if you look at your output, Alex said, it's not enough, then you're not going to get the inputs that you want in terms of kind of revenue, and really like making the business really simple. And then sometimes some of it was just learned behaviour, like work ethic, like I've said on this podcast too many times actually for a man as successful as him. But I used to work for a guy called Matthew Eames, and Matthew ran this company, and we were pretty big and pretty successful. And you'd look over, and he'd be the hardest working man in the room, and he were going, there's this part of you that goes, oh, when it's your business, you sort of step away, and then having the work ethic alongside me, I thought was kind of fantastic. But the big question that everyone's always talking about on this podcast is, we always think banking's so far ahead of insurance and other industries are, but you've got a real lens on whether we are or not, because you've worked in these different sectors. Like, how far is insurance behind from potentially a sort of technology evolution standpoint to other industries that you've worked in?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, because I think quite often industries and different industries need a sort of compelling point of change. And so if you look at banking, certainly automated trading came in, but think of things like the banking data standards. I think that was really driven by a regulator requirement to be able to switch bank accounts, make it easier for customers. So your ability to be able to switch customers, and that also affected things like the telco industry. So sometimes you need external drivers to drive change, and sometimes it'll drive from inside. So I think if we look at insurance broadly and generally, I think there are lots of areas where insurance is sort of leading, is moving forward. Is it because there's a compelling need to do so? I think to a degree, but I also think you're seeing, if you look at the London market, for instance, 26% of people in the London market are over 50. It's a known problem, a challenge we've got about bringing people through insurance, but and you're seeing that change, and you're seeing people that are coming in with new, fresh ideas that are used to, the iPhone or the mobile phone generation that have never not had one. People that are used to very simple, easy user journeys, customer journeys. So the expectation, I think, of customers of people within the organisations has increased, and we've responded to that. I do think, I think it'd be harsh to say, we're miles behind in insurance. I think where we're going to be shifting to is insurance historically has been quite. It looks back to assess risk, so it uses data to look at risk. It's sort of reactive, or looks in someone is at the front door at the back, and I think we're going to be able to be more proactive. And an example I'd use of that is, so if you look at, say, car insurance, so commercial insurance, I think again the customer journeys in personal lines insurance now are very seamless, very easy. 20 years ago, you had to go to a broker in your high street to try and get insured. I think the consolidation sites where now you can go and do compare pricing, very different as well, and that customer journey is very different. So I think we're seeing that. But if you look at again, car insurance. We've started to put black boxes in cars, and what does that do? It enables us to see if you're a good driver or a bad driver, you speed or not. That assesses your risk. It also acts as a control because you know it's there, so you're going to drive safer, you're going to drive slower. And you compare that to maybe what we're seeing something like a Tesla, where it can now preempt that somebody's going to step in front of the car. Right? That's preemptive. It's not basing itself on historic data. So, and we're starting to use parametric insurance to start to be able to do almost real-time assessment of insurance or of risk. So I think we're in a real pivotal time for the industry at the moment. I can see lots of opportunities. I think AI is going to bring and the ability to leverage data. And insurance, frankly, is a data business. That's why we've got so many actuaries looking over numbers. Why we've got exposure teams, cat exposure teams that are data scientists these days. So I think the opportunity right now is there to continue to push forward. And as I said, I think we're seeing it in lots of ways. I think the challenge for us will be how we manage through that. Data is at the heart of it all, and we might talk a little bit more about some of the data challenges that we've got. But we've already got AI generated syndicates. Kai that's in Lloyd's, and the LMA have just recently sort of done a review looking at sort of robo underwriting and how that's going to fit in to effectively how we're going to sort of operate, and the augmenting of underwriting, the pure algo underwriting that's going to it's going to be using AI, and how that fits together. And I do think it's going to be an augmentation of underwriting, not a replacement of underwriting. I think there's still, we want to make better risk decisions. I think in what I don't want to say sort of simple insurance, because nothing's simple, but certainly in more personal lines or volume insurance, I think we've already seen that. I think where we'll see it more is in more of the specialty business, and in more of what I call complex risk, and that will be that we'll be able to provide underwriters, claims adjusters, and brokers much more detail and much more insight than they've had historically, to make better decisions, to get pricing more accurate, to ensure that claims are processed more quickly. So I think we're at a real pivotal point for the industry. Quite an exciting time, I think, for insurance. I really do.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's been interesting for me, actually. We've worked on some portfolio underwriting work recently, senior sort of innovation space, and where they're looking at multiple classes, and you kind of start to see that the future of the industry is probably not the non-eye line specialist underwriters. And I'm not saying they don't have a place, but you can see the kind of the evolution of that, because there'll be tools and there'll be kind of augmentation of skill set to kind of allow people to kind of do a bit more cross-class underwriting, but still having a kind of a sector specialist expertise. Des, I'm conscious of time, so let's skip a few questions, because I really wanted to get your take on data in a bit more detail, and then probably move it on to the big talking point, AI. But we talked about data at length, and how do you qualify data, and why is it important that you have to qualify data? Because this is the qualification of data is something that you and I talked about at length when we met at ITC.
Yeah, I mean, data is one of those things, but like people sort of say digital. What do you mean? What do you mean by digital? Yeah. And we're talking about AI, because I think that's another area where people talk AI, and I'm not sure they'll give examples that aren't. I think the challenge that I think the industry faces, and I've sort of spoken to a number of my peers, and we certainly see it, is insurance is to some degree overflowing with historical data that maybe we can't get access to, maybe we can't conform in a way that we can use, and so if I talk to other organisations, we're all in very much similar projects running, right? So everybody's looked at how they get data platforms operating, whether that's a data warehouse or however you want to describe it. How do you conform that data? How do you get raw data? How do you deal with unstructured data? So when we talk about data and qualifying it, again, I'm not a data expert. We've got some great data experts, and as I said, we're seeing more data scientists start to operate. I mentioned our CEM team. They're doing CAT analysis, and we've now got data scientists in that group because the level of data that we're getting and can access to do that, we need that. We're seeing data scientists pop up in our organisation, and we're starting to work with them about how we enable them, because that's the key thing. There's no point having data scientists without the data. So, as we start to sort of look through that and look at, well, okay, how do you think about data simply? I sort of goes like completeness. Have we got it? Quality, is it any good? And analytics, can we do anything with it? Right? And I think they're all built on each other. So the point around qualifying data is quite often, and this is what one of the challenges for AI. We'll talk about in a minute about the amount of fake data that AI is now building its opinions off of. But for our industry, we cannot afford to make decisions off the back of poor data. So qualifying data. So we've looked at how do we give a gold, silver, bronze standard to quality of data. Something like ChatGPT. Well, that's a bronze, right? It's very difficult to understand where the source of that is. It's not ours. We haven't asked it. We don't. Whereas I think internal data that we can qualify. So we are using tooling very successfully around ensuring that we have the data. So where are we missing data? Where can we augment data into our environments? Quality. We use a product called DQ Pro. It's been hugely successful for us. Our level of quality on data we care about, and there's data we care about and there's data we don't, and that will move. I'm sure there's data that we currently don't care about today that once we get into certain areas we may do, but we're very much focused on trying to get that, ensure we've got the data, we've got access to it, and the quality of it's right. To do that with the level of data we've got, you've got to start to qualify it and put it into and effectively into what's important, what's not, what are you okay not having mastered, what do you need to be mastered, and how you use it. So we think of data in a sort of data lake, if you like. You've then got raw data, which is sort of like taking that into a format that you can use. We then move into sort of how do we get that into a consumable route that can be taken out of a data lake? How do we conform that data? And then the last point, once you've done all of that, is like how does our business use that? So for us, we've got a tiering system, and level 4 is an analytics service, but data has to go through and be passed up to that. So it needs to be presented as what it is. So do I want people going down and trying to report against raw data? No, because it's raw data and it's not qualified. So we're doing a lot of work in that space. So when we talk about the data challenges that we've got, it's all of that. It's all of the above. And I don't think we're any different to anybody else. We're fortunate that we're replacing most of our core systems. We've done a real big investment and transformation over the last 4 or 5 years. So we've now got new environments and new systems that give us much more granularity and access to data, which is great, and then gives you the headache of right now everybody wants to use that and access it, and you've then got that as a bigger challenge. So that when we talk about qualifying and some of the data challenges, that's what it is. I think the other one for insurance generally is we don't have that single standard. Yeah, we've got a code, and I think more things are aligning against that. Lloyd's obviously with its Blueprint 2 work is trying to get again moving forward on trying to get some more commonality in that. But risk codes, what we call brokers, all of that is still not as structured, I guess, as some other industries, particularly banking. They've got their sort of core banking, certainly for the UK data set. And again, I think that will come. I think we'll need to do that. And that, again, is an opportunity, I think, as we start to conform this data and get access to it. And we are seeing much more demand now from a business point of view to access data that historically, operational or cover data that historically wasn't particularly accessible, and now is. And now the challenge is how we present it in a way that and qualify it that it's usable.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that theme towards kind of usability of data, because I've for a long time, we've had the thesis that, well, it's not a thesis, it's just forget that insurance is an investment vehicle, and insurance is the method of investment.
Yeah.
Data and how you approach it is your unique trading proposition, right? So, and because everyone has their own data set and kind of the access to it, but building access to it appears to be kind of the biggest stumbling block, and that's the evolution that we've seen people go through. I'm super conscious of time, but I do want to get your thoughts on this. And we talked about AI and how can we do a podcast in 2025 and not talk about AI? Des, we'd be letting ourselves down. But yeah, it's been a big talking point. And I think something we touched on previously was what do you think less informed leaders are missing when it comes to AI? Because I think we talk a lot about the opportunities, but what do you think is being missed by leadership when we're talking about this subject?
First, I'll probably say I think it'd be impossible to be less informed at the moment as a leader, because I think AI, you can't sort of turn a corner or turn a page or scroll a screen without seeing that. We talked previously about what is AI, and I think that's the first question people need to understand for themselves. And people talk about things that I would class as sort of RPA or automation, and it's like that's not AI. The analogy I like to use when trying to sort of simplify, and it's probably the world's moved on because you don't have to be this simple with AI anymore, because people are much more educated around it. But it's like the journey of a map through to Waze or intelligent sat nav. We had a map; it was paper based. We then got sat nav that turned that into a digital version. It wasn't clever; it just sort of managed to route you. We then started getting traffic information, and that's to tell you where you're going to get held up. And now we've got things like Waze that will make decisions about what route you take and where you go based on historic data and current data. Waze is more AI. When we look at sat-nav, that was more RAP or automation. It was just automating a map. And I think we need to work out where we see the value of AI versus actually this is just the continuation of the automation and digitalization journey. So that's one part of it. I also think that we need to ensure that we're focused on problems, not solutions. Right? So particularly technology and technologists, and I'm one of them. There's a tendency to find a great solution and go hunt a problem. I think many people would argue that we do that a lot. Blockchain's a great example that's been the next best thing. Right? And it's like there's a problem. If we manage to really find a solution, it like knocks out the park. It's been around for 20 years, probably 15 years, and no, we haven't yet. There's other technologies. If you'd rewind 2 years ago, everybody was telling you that the metaverse was where you had to be, right? And the metaverse was going to change our world. That was a technology that I was scratching my head on because I couldn't quite get my head around why everybody needed to be there. Mostly it was because you could sell a product 8 times instead of one, virtually. But I think we have to be careful that we don't get wrapped up in the technology. Right? What business problem was the metaverse fixing for us? And I couldn't connect to that. Right? Whereas AI I can, and I think there's a lot of opportunities. So I think the first thing I'd say is for people to not dive straight in and let's start proof of concepts on solutions where we go find a problem. But we've certainly in HCC, we've sort of taken a sort of step back. We're looking at it and we're saying, actually, we're going to be business problem led in the way that we do AI. Of course, we're still doing, we're interested in things. It's such a fast moving world that the moment you start a proof of concept, by the time you finished it, it's old hat anyway. So, I think understanding where value sits, is it really an automation challenge you've got? Is it a data problem you've got, or is it something that AI can enhance? And I do think what we'll see is a move away from what people, like large language modules and like big things like ChatGPT, use of those sitting in the back, but more agent-based technology that is localized to a specific role, task, function, problem, and augments people around dealing with that issue. So, I think we're already starting to see that. If you look at Copilot from Microsoft, it's broken out into about 5 different styles of AI and Copilot. I think that the challenge will be, no one's going to have their own AI. You just can't, and we're going to be dependent on sort of like the super AI providers, your Googles, your Amazons, your Microsofts. Now, is that a problem for us? Not if you think about agent-based, because agent-based AI can use that as a basis, but access your data as well, and you build an agent that gives you what you want. So I think I think for me, it's understanding how that's evolving, because it is evolving, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be an expert in it, but it's certainly looking at the problems you're trying to address, and back out, go right to left from that, rather than, oh, ChatGPT, what can that do for me? I think we need to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. And I think it's a similar story of innovation, right? We need to ensure that we don't just innovate for the sake of it. When we deal with innovation in our world, we're looking for a business problem we want to bring innovation to, not wander around with a bit of funky stuff. Right? So I think that would be my, as I sort of talk to my peers, I think we're all roughly in the same place around that. It's making sure that we can target this where it needs to be, understand value creation from it, and personally, I see it as much more augmentation through agents, and augmenting things like underwriting teams and capabilities, and claims teams and capabilities, than replacing.
Yeah, I would echo that, and it kind of reflects on the kind of what we've seen in the kind of venture capital markets where the investment has been going. I think definitely there was a problem and solution with the wrong way round. Here's an amazing new thing. Does it actually solve for something? And now where the money's going is, solving real world problems that come from insurers, and we're seeing that with kind of the investing teams as well. Like the teams that are being invested in there's a lot more ex-industry knowledge going into them, saying, look, this is a problem that I face daily. Let's solve for it. Des, we're absolutely out of time, and in fact, it's probably overrun. But I knew we would. I thought we might do after we went the first time, and we'd probably do another episode of that if we needed to. But look, absolute pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting to kind of speak to someone that comes from all these different backgrounds, but also kind of have such a big role to play in a big global player. So appreciate you giving up time this morning.
Okay, no, real pleasure, and good to speak to you again, Alex.
Thanks, Des.